You're listening to the Co-Creator Network. When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change.
Hi, this is HeatherAsh Amara with Tosi Radio and also The Way of the Desert with Don Miguel Ruiz. Don Miguel is doing another interview right now, so he'll be joining us late for this joined show of Tosi Radio and Way of the Desert. And Miguel Jr. and I are hooking up to interview different authors, and we've been really just so blessed with the energy and information and wisdom and insight that's coming through these different interviews. And today we're joined by a woman that's written a very profound book. Her name is Therese Tappouni, and her book is called The Gifts of Grief. Welcome, Therese.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you so much for joining us. I wanted to share the quote that's at the beginning of your book, The Gifts of Grief. It's such a beautiful quote, and that quote is, "There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." And what a beautiful way to start a book that is so powerful in helping everyone move through the different phases of grief. So I'd like to start, Therese, by having you share your story of what inspired you to write the book, both the initial tragedy that happened with your son, which just as I was reading it, I just wept. So thank you for the beauty in how you wrote your story. And then how your journey has been that then brought you to healing and to sharing this incredible book with us.
Well, first I'd like to say that quote you read was from Leonard Cohen from Anthem, and I just, to me, that is absolutely a description of what happens to the heart. And that crack opens it and lets the light come in. So that's a later process. Certainly wasn't true on the day that my son was struck by a truck and never regained consciousness. After 10 days, he passed away. And he was 11 at the time. And it was that tragic moment in my life that turned my life around in a way that I never would have expected. At first, I went through great anger, great depression. The disconnection of a child passing before a parent is just something that no one could possibly explain to you. And it was either going to put me down or it was going to take me somewhere that I had no idea of. And the latter was what happened to me. And I think it was a conscious choice. You get to a point where the purpose of your loved one's life is getting lost in the darkness of your response to it. And to me, the question became, was that honoring his death? And that enabled me to begin to look at it from a different perspective. And it wasn't, I have no intention of making that sound easy. It took time and it took a lot of effort and a lot of attention. And in the meantime, eventually got divorced and had a long period of ill health, which is something that very frequently follows grieving, the ill health. And the divorce is a really tragic percentage of people who get divorced after the loss of a child. Sometimes it takes a year and sometimes it takes a long time. In my case, it took a long time. But it's like two people grieving are sometimes like oil and water. They don't ever grieve the same way, and that's what the book is focused on, the fact that your grieving is as individual as your fingerprints, and there is no one who can tell you this is how it should go.
Yes.
So, I hope that came through in the book when you read it.
It really did. And I love that you were so incredibly honest with what your journey was and didn't flinch from telling the truth about it. And that you also opened it up to everybody. That
Okay.
you, yay, Miguel's on. That in one part of your book, you write about the many faces of grief. And that there's not just the death of someone, death of a parent, death of a child, death of a sibling or a spouse, that there's also divorce, safety issues, loss of religious faith, moving as a child, all of these different things that we have grief about that put us into a grieving process. And then also that you talked about global grief, just being in the world.
Yes, that's something that I really like to talk about right now in the world today, because I think people have no idea how technology has affected the way that grief comes into our lives. And it's in our living room on a daily basis. It comes through our television. It comes through our technical instruments. We see death of children. We see war. We see floods. We see people swept away in a tsunami. It can't help but affect us on a personal level, but we don't realize it, and we don't realize that it goes into our bodies and that it adds itself to our reservoir of things that we grieve over. So it makes the issues of grief much more difficult to approach because we don't realize what's really there. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And having gone through several losses recently myself, what I really realize is that our body stores grief, like all emotion. And that I really gave myself permission to grieve the loss of my relationship. And like when my dad died 5 years ago, to grieve not just my father dying, but all the times we had moved when I was a kid. And it was so healing to let myself go through the grief. And then I also felt the same thing of that, like just so much tragedy that is around us. And it's so vital for all of us to really open to letting grief move through us rather than trying to manage it. That has so many ramifications.
And also to not compare it. You know, it's I talk in the book about all of the emotions that you experience in grief and all of the fear and your prayers and your bargaining with God. You know, if I do this, then will you do that? And this all becomes part of, like you mentioned, our cellular structure. It's scientifically proven that's the case. And it's like we have this giant magnet in us, and grief is a magnet. And when we suffer other instances of grief, they just kind of go like filings to a magnet, and the grief gets bigger. But we tend to compare ourselves, and for instance, somebody who is grieving over aging, it's a very reasonable thing that you will have some grief over losing certain abilities and looks and things like that. And people berate themselves for that and say, well, that's compared to a death, that's nothing. But it's a small death. It's the death of who you were, you know, the death of some of your dreams, possibly. So it's important that people realize that there's an awful lot that's gathered together in that place we name grief, and that it can be turned into a place where we have growth in our lives rather than shame.
Nice. Beautiful. So I hear that Don Miguel Ruiz Jr. has joined us. Hey, Miguel.
Hi, HeatherAsh. How are you?
Good.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yay.
Hello, Miguel.
Hi, Therese. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you very much. I'm glad you're here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much. I had an interview that just finished exactly at the point where the show was starting. So thank you so much for everyone for patience. I have a couple of questions because well, first things first. My condolences on the loss of your son. As a father, I can't even begin to imagine what that's like, and I believe the way you described it, I can totally relate, and I could feel the pain. And there's a moment in the book that where you talk about you felt his energy, and he's talking about that healing, that wound, that it's a
Yes,
portal to healing.
yes.
I think that is the most beautiful thing. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Well, that first came to me when I was with Jean Houston, and I was in a church doing a healing because had had a long period of an illness that was not getting better, and I didn't know at the time it was related to my grieving. And I was in the church and felt, I know my son's energy. I know just instinctively and intuitively when he's in my space. And it's the same energy that he had in life. And I was in the church and standing by a statue of the Blessed Mother, and all of a sudden I felt hands on my shoulders. And I felt his energy, and I heard him say that my grief was not a wound, it was a portal.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when, and even just now when I said that, my whole body is covered with goosebumps, because it was just the most peaceful, loving, reassuring feeling I think I'd had since he died, and it'd been many years. And it was just this reassurance that I wasn't just wallowing in a place of a wounding. It wasn't just about a wounding. It was that it had opened a possibility.
Mm-hmm.
And the possibility turned out to be him encouraging me to bend my work to grieving, where I had been working with women for a long time and talking about passion and possibilities, but I hadn't been addressing grieving.
Mm-hmm.
And it just changed my whole life. It changed my whole purpose. So that's how I understood.
And how have you been using the portal? Like, how do you say that you would be the function of the portal, and how do you manage that in healing?
I think, first of all, I understood that it was a portal through my heart and my soul, that it had nothing to do with the brain.
Yeah.
And we spend so much time in this society trying to figure things out in a logical way, and it wasn't logical. Mm-hmm. So the portal for me is when I go into meditation and I ask to be taken where I'm meant to be taken and to receive what I'm meant to receive. There's another pipeline that I never knew I had until the death of my son, and he opened it for me. That's the way I understood it. And the last book that I wrote I felt like it was downloaded through that portal. Mm-hmm. So does that answer your question? Or you?
Yes. And the with that in mind, you talk about the stages of grief, and the most compelling aspect is that moment of acceptance, which is that final stage of grief. Can you walk us through the stages?
Well, I think that the main thing about the stages, and what I like to tell people, is they won't be the same for two people. Mm-hmm. They are, people go forward, they go backward, they go around them, they stay in certain ones, and then they move away from them, and it's really hard nowadays it's hard for people to actually believe that there are stages of grief, because they get angry in the midst of whatever's going on with them. They get upset with the fact that they're not doing it exactly the way they thought they were going to do it. So what I did was take the stages of grief that are the scientific stages of grief and say that it's not necessarily the way you will go through your stages, particularly if you enter a spiritual place. But the theory of Dr. Kubler-Ross, who was famous for this, was that you start with denial, you go into anger, and then you start bargaining, and then you go into depression, and the final part is acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that, I said something in the book about I feel like because the left brain takes over, we say, okay, this is the way it is. And if a person in grief isn't going through it that way, then they need medication.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost immediate leap from if they're not doing it right. It's as if there's a right way to go through grief, and there isn't.
Mm-hmm.
And that was an amazing part of the book to read, how the Psychiatrist Society, the book, I can't remember what it's called now, has shifted from a normal grieving process to be 2 months, and you said that it's now come down to 2 weeks. Which is...
Yes. They're trying to put it in the 2013, the Manual for Psychiatrists, the MD, I'm going to say it wrong.
MDSR?
Yes, thank you.
DMSR or something.
Yeah, that if someone is not, is showing, depression shows in the same way their symptoms like grief. So it used to be they say, you have 2 months to get over it. And if you don't, then a psychiatrist has the right to give you the medications that you need. Now they're saying 2 weeks. And it's so ludicrous to me to imagine that the people writing this book have never been through grief. Because who can recover in 2 weeks? That's,
Mm-hmm.
But they did have, I don't have the notes in front of me, but they did have one of the authors of the report said that very thing. He said that was ludicrous and it should not be done. So I still don't know if they have included that in the 2013.
With that, it kind of reflects something. There's one thing from the medical community to have the expectation of 2 months to 2 weeks or however long a measured time, because it's part of science to have measured. But it's also reflecting something in truth about an individual who is somewhat uncomfortable around someone who's grieving. You can say that is that to hurry someone up to heal from grieving or to try to get them to be happy again.
Mm-hmm.
From your standpoint, what would you think is that force for someone around us that is our friends? You call them your support. There's a difference between those people who are there for us and the people who can wait for us to heal. What would you what is your thoughts on the division between those two?
Well, I write about the allies, but also the friend of the heart, which I absolutely love. John O'Donohue's work, the Anam Cara, where he talks about the friend of the heart. The friend of the heart only wants to be there for you and serve in any capacity that you want them to, and generally to just quietly be there for your support. People who are nervous about grief are people who want you to be happy because it makes them nervous the way you are. They don't know this person you become. And instead of just opening their heart and saying, this is my friend, she's still my friend, she's just got a reason, for behaving the way she's behaving, however, whether it's withdrawing or going into anger, a person who truly loves from the heart will love you and just be there steadfast. And most of us we're not trained to do that. Mm-hmm. We, in our families, we're, so many of us go out with that, put on that happy face because we don't want to make anybody uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I remember when I first went back into a social group, it was the PTA at my children's school, and I had 3 women come up to me and say, I lost a child. One of them, I remember, had chicken pox, and one was a baby, and one was stillborn. But I never knew that they had lost children, and I had been on this board with them for 2 or 3 years. And it was because they didn't want to make people feel bad. And that's the way we're raised. I mean, I mentioned in the book about the wounded warriors. You know, they come home, and the ones we focus on are the ones in the hospital who still have a can-do, gung-ho, cheerful attitude, even though they don't have their legs. And we honor them for that. We don't know what to do with those wounded warriors who are depressed and committing suicide. We have no method of coping with that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I totally see that, especially when one is there to help, you know, especially want to help each other heal.
Yes.
And you can say that it is that healing that allows us to find that light. I had a conversation a few years back, and in Texas actually, with someone, and she had lost her son, but she was feeling guilty because she was beginning to heal because she had lost her son, and she thought that in healing is a way of disrespecting her son. What would you tell her if she was talking to you and said that?
I would tell her to ask her heart to connect with her son's heart energy and ask him what he would want. Because it's so obvious when we do it that way that they wouldn't want us to continue to be in pain and to suffer, but they would want us to honor them by the way we live our life. And I think that when we go into that place of guilt and fear, there's a lot of fear there, and a lot of sense of, you know, I was his mother and I didn't protect him. That was my job as a mother. So you're feeling angry at yourself. And I think that connecting through the heart is the best way to say, you know, actually put yourself in the place of your child and say, what would you want Mom to feel? And we know they were loving beings who wouldn't want that. And that's got to be heart. It can't be head, because the head won't go there. You know?
No, it has no way to really understand.
No, it just says what we've been taught, and I think I wrote in the book about the way we try to protect in this culture is, you know, everything is about protection, and we feel like we've somehow put up all those walls and those fences and disinfected ourselves and, you know, made sure our cars are safe and our children are kept home, and we just feel, how did this thing get in after I did all that? So, yeah, and we're attached to that. It's like you talk about the attachments. You know, we're attached to that image that we can put up all this protection and it's going to work. And it's actually very primitive kind of thought. You know, that we can trade in our good behavior for good results.
Yes.
Yeah, I know. It's like what is that famous expression? If you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, and it shifts. So, what are the gifts of grief? Like, so in a sense that grief being, since we've covered what grief is and how we cope with grief, that those gifts that grief gives us for our audience, what are they?
Well, in my case, they were very specific. The death of my son led me to my spiritual path. Before that, I was a very conservative Catholic. I was very certain that if I did good, that I would be rewarded. The gift that he gave me in the long run was to go on the spiritual path that showed that had nothing to do with it. That God wasn't going to punish me for using my heart. The death of my marriage was the gift of my personal life, which I didn't know at the time, would never have agreed with anybody at the time who told me that.
Mm-hmm.
And looking back, I could say, that my husband offered me a gift that I couldn't refuse. And when I lost my health, it was like I learned how to appreciate what I had.
Mm-hmm.
Because we never think we're going to lose our health. We think that happens to other people.
Yeah.
And when it does happen, it really teaches us about honoring our bodies. And that taught me a whole new way of meditation and prayer and honoring my body.
Mm-hmm.
The bankruptcy was the hardest in finding the gift in the long run, because it was just learning to live without fearing the loss of stuff.
Yeah.
It's like, you don't see that when you're in the middle of it. It's all full of guilt and, all that other stuff. But I wrote a poem about the death of my son that made me realize that I had found beauty in his passing, and that was a real shock to me that was possible.
Yeah.
So there are all different gifts, and when we talk about the global grief, all of that tragedy out there, it's really hard to take an individual, and especially these people, whose children were killed in Sandy Hook, to tell them you will someday see a gift is not possible. You can't do that when somebody's in the first stages of grief.
Yeah.
No.
You have to be very careful.
There, you mentioned throughout in each stage for each and during the loss of your son, the loss of your marriage, the loss, the financial loss, and such, and the word guilt. What's the role of guilt in grieving?
Well, I think the only role of guilt in grieving is if you are in an active pursuit of your spiritual life and you recognize it as guilt, and you know that there's no place in the human spiritual life for guilt, other than guilt is showing you that you're a human being and that you have feelings and you have a sense of responsibility, but it's misplaced when it's in grief, because it's not your fault. It's not to take on that fault is only showing you that you're putting your foot on the wrong path. So it is a recognition in most things. It's a recognition that you're a human being who's aware of the suffering of other people and so forth. But guilt is the wrong emotion. Compassion is the right emotion to approach grief.
And in your words, what's compassion?
Compassion is the ability, and it's almost more like empathy, but sometimes empathy is too connected. It's the ability to look at the actions of a person and say, I don't know. There's a beautiful poem by Miller Williams, whom I just love his poetry, and he has a poetry called Compassion, and in it he uses the line, you do not know what is going on down there where the blood meets the bone. And I just love that, because it's true. You see what's happening with a person and you go, oh, I wish they'd just snap out of that, or I wish they'd just quit making me feel bad, or and you have to put yourself in the heart space, which is saying, I don't know what's going on down there where the blood meets the bone. So that's kind of how I feel about compassion. Not putting yourself in that place and suffering for the person, but allowing that person to show who they are without judgment.
Yes. I totally agree with you.
Oh, good. I like that.
I totally do. No, but that's a wonderful way to describe compassion, because and a lot of times when in helping someone, we confuse compassion with pity, and which
Yes.
to me is what you describe how guilt, functions. But basically, pity is not respecting someone's own strength to that you have to carry the weight for them. But compassion is basically being there to lend that hand. It doesn't mean I'm going to carry the weight for you because I know you can. But if you ask me to help, I'm able to help. To me, but the way you described it is beautiful, because in your description, it wasn't as mental as the way I just described it. There was a lot of heart in it. From the experience that you've had, it's that beautiful form of expressing that compassion and being able to be there, yet not take on the weight of someone else is a beautiful way.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the comment because it's very important to me. I believe that people mistake being a heartfelt person with being a pitying person, or a person who will say, "Let me take that over for you because I'm full of heart," and that's not what it is at all. It's honoring the person's journey, and yet standing by to help them if they fall. So.
And it does seem like so much of the key around moving through grief and loss and the gift is when we use grief as a way to come into our hearts more deeply and to come into our depth. There's a beautiful African saying that every time there's loss or grief, that the bowl of our being gets carved deeper.
That's beautiful. I like that.
Yeah, and I've really felt that as I've been with people going through grief, or where I've been going through my own grief, that when I let it, I come out the other side feeling deeper and more connected to all humans. And when I'm in the resistance of it, then there's that place of self-pity and fighting it's not fair, which is part of, obviously so part of the process as well. And
it's not fair. That's pure us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Why me?
Why me, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And the answer is why not?
Yes. And what's the gift? And it's so true. As we hold other people through their grief, just showing up and listening, like you were saying so beautifully, that you don't ask, "Hey, what's the gift?" in the beginning, because in the beginning there's no gift. When you're deep, deep in it, and just being present, being willing to be in your heart with wherever someone else is such a learning process. Because as you've been saying, we're not trained. We don't have skills, but we can learn. And your book is such a beautiful guide to help both in our own grieving process as well as in supporting others through their grief.
Yeah, I think the main thing that I wanted to do there was we are such a head-oriented world. And as we get more and more technology, tend to get more and more that way. And my book is asking people to learn to remember that the heart came first. As I'm a heart math provider, and we talk about the fact that when the fetus is forming, the heart comes first and it starts itself beating. There was no brain. So why we turned around and said the brain says and then it goes to the heart, we don't know why we did that, but we did. But the truth is that the emotional center of us is in our heart, and it tells the brain what to do. It takes in the emotion and gets the feeling, and then it sends the signals to the brain. So it's really important that when we're doing any work that's of great value or of spiritual value, that it's the heart and the soul that we connect with. And we can figure it out with the brain, but that's not where it lives.
Mm-hmm.
So,
one of the great things about your book. Hello? Hi, sorry. One of the great things about your book, and the big gift you had already mentioned, is that reconnect with our emotional body. It's basically it really is about tuning out, like learning to not listen to the rational mind, and as the main driver of healing from wound, but actually going into our emotional body and accepting this emotion as like accepting this grief. This is really happening to me. And the way out, or you can say the beginning of the healing, starts with that embrace of self.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you elaborate on and share with us that process in you, and not only the loss of your son, but in the loss of your health and the loss of your marriage and finances, of course. But what was that process in you of that reconnect? And I know you talked about the portal. And how was that for you?
I think it started in the process when I started studying with Jean Houston, and I also read a book by Bruce Lipton called The Biology of Belief. I don't know if you've read that, but it's a very interesting study from the left brain scientific point of view, looking at the body and then going, oh, shoot, that's not how it happens. This is how it happens.
Uh-huh.
So it was the first thing that I did was learn to breathe. And I know people find that so simplistic. But in the book, I talk about how people have gone to a shallow breathing. Yeah. And that's what causes a lot of our stress, is that we're not filtering properly, and we're just in 90% of doctors' visits are because of stress. And you have to start with, how am I breathing? And the first thing I do when I have a class is ask people, where is your breath? And they go, what do you mean, where's my breath? Well, is it high in your chest? Is it in your heart space? Is it in your belly? And they're always breathing high in their chest, very shallow. And so we go back and talk about how you breathed as a baby and how we need to go back to learning to breathe so our body is oxygenated properly and we're focused. And that, of course, is what meditation is, but people don't realize it's that simple. It's just learning to breathe and relax your body. And then once you do that, you start to consciously connect with every part of your body. For me, it was the heart, because my heart was broken. I mean, we say that, and it's true. And I needed to breathe into my heart, and I needed to learn how to love myself. And you do that by appreciating your body and appreciating all the things your body does for you, no matter how badly you treat it. And particularly when you're in mourning, you don't eat right, you don't sleep well, all of these things create issues in the body. So the first step for me was just learning to breathe properly and learning to relax my body and learn to appreciate my body, which I didn't at the time. And then I began to expand out that awareness that I learned with Jean about time and how you can enter time in different ways and actually put yourself in a place like I could literally put myself in a place where I would ask my son to come and sit with me and just feel his energy. That was a big growth step for me, being a Western left-brained educated person, to believe that was even possible. And then you start to ask your heart to bring things in that it needs for healing. And it happens that way because you manifest it by opening your heart. So those are the first steps. Learning to breathe, relax your body, and open your heart. And the rest follows.
For those of you that are joining us, this is HeatherAsh, Amara, and Don Miguel Ruiz Jr. We are combining our shows, Tosi Radio and Way of the Desert, and are interviewing Therese Tappouni about her book, Gifts of Grief. One of the things, Therese, that you share is around moving at your own speed, and that we've talked about this of needs and calling in allies and support, both physical allies that can be with you as well as energetic. So you calling in your son and calling in the different energies. And one thing I was struck by too is the process you call cocooning, of creating a resting space for yourself. Can you talk a little bit about that, about how you call in guidance and support to rest, to take breaks through the healing process?
Yeah, and that's, I'd like the listeners to know that I have all of these meditations and exercises in my book. And I also have MP3 of them with my voice over the Prague Symphony Orchestra and music by composer Michael Hoppe, and also Lance Ware's Heart and Soul Meditations. And today I wanted to offer anybody who buys the book, send me an email that you were listening to the show, and I will send you a link to the MP3s for free. Because
and what's the email?
Tappouni, TTAPPOUNI @AOL.com. Or they can go through my website at theresetappouni.com.
Okay, great.
And there are
Thank
11 tracks of the, and it's so hard for people to follow those directions and do the meditations when they're holding a book in their hand. You know, they can put the book down, close their eyes, and listen to me lead them through the process. It's a lot easier.
Yes.
And what a huge gift to be led through the process by someone who's been through it. So thank you for that gift.
Perfect.
You're welcome.
Thank you. In your book, one question I had is when your son passed away, and you're talking about the end of your relationship with your husband, but what I want to know more is, as a father, how did you were able to handle the grief of your children, like the siblings, that his sister who was there, who watched next to and the brothers who, as they grew up, he was, not, they didn't really get to know him as well as his sister. What was the process of, as a parent, and teaching your children about that grief and how to nurture?
Well, the hardest thing is that at least one parent, and a lot of times both parents disappear. So it's not only that they lose a sibling, but they lose their parents at the same time. They go into their own personal grief. And for whatever reason, I was able to understand that they needed a mother who was whole. And they needed a mother that hopefully in some way showed them that you can survive the worst and you can still go forward and live a good life and be a good person and not become bitter. And I thought it was really, really, I don't know where I got this information in the middle of my grief to know that I needed to model that for them. The only thing I didn't get was the understanding that I needed to also let them see my grief. That was the one part that I feel if I had been older, I would have maybe had better information, but I hid a lot of my emotional life from them in order to show them that you could get through it. And as they got older, I was able to have the conversation with them, and they understood totally. I thought I was hiding my grief. They knew what I was going through. So I think it's just when they see that, when they have a parent who says, I'm not dying with your brother. I'm still here. Because in a lot of cases, that happens. In cases, you model to your children that one was the most important one, and I'm disappearing too. And that's a really heavy burden for kids to handle. They have enough grieving going on, losing a sibling, so they need their parents.
So what advice would you give your younger self? Like, what would be the stage, like, in looking back? What is that? What would you tell your younger self to do different?
I don't. I forgive my younger self.
Oh, good. I love that answer. I love that answer. Perfect. It's so true. It's so true.
I did the best I could with who I was at the time, and I think I used that. I talked about that a little bit in the book about having issues with my father. And one day I did that, going back in time and visualizing how old he was when he had the behaviors that I was so angry about. And when I realized he was only in his 30s, I was like, oh, I can forgive him. He didn't know any better.
Yes.
Yes.
But we don't.
But that's exactly it. Like, that answer you gave me is perfect, because it is that thing. It's like we can't go back to change it. And if we dwell on the concepts of what I should have done, that simple says, I forgive you, cuts all that out, because it's the truth. We did the best we could, or at least we did it to the best of what we knew what to do. And to have that forgiveness is really a huge healing. It really is.
Yes.
Wow.
It is. And that's when I started to heal from my illness, was when I forgave myself. I was busily going along being a good girl and forgiving everybody else. But I left myself out of the equation. That was part of the problem. So somewhere in there, I was punishing myself. So that's the first thing that I want everybody to know, that it's such a freeing thing to forgive yourself. And if you go back visually, you breathe into your heart, allow your heart to see you as you were then, you can't not forgive yourself. So again, it's go from the brain to the heart.
How can you say to someone right now who's in that downward spiral of self-judgment and guilt and over the grief of losing somebody or something, or whichever stage, what would be the one thing you would say to them to help them stop that downward spiral?
I think that the most important thing I would say was that, and this is it's so easy to say and so hard to do, but to stop and look in your heart and love yourself. Because they're in a place of judgment against themselves. And it's a really, really difficult thing. I have clients who are not ready. They don't want to hear, but I ask them to use the exercise in my book where they go and they visualize their heart and see the wounds that are on their heart and see the pain that's in their heart. And for their heart, that way they're not saying, I'm forgiving myself, but they heal their heart. That's the first step. But it's very hard when people are in that space. It's very hard because they're judging themselves, and most of that comes from the brain. So I just teach them to do heart breathing and tell them it takes time. It does take time. Allow what's happening when it's happening.
And the most interesting thing, that's the hardest for all of us to experience when we're grieving, is allowing ourselves the permission to grieve. Like you said, we tend to flood ourselves with work. We really busy or go into alcohol or do all these things to escape.
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, now it's that permission to grieve, to understand that there's no timeline.
Yes.
It's going to whatever it takes, and you can say that's it's the quintessential moment of healing. Accept our truth that says, "This is me grieving, and this is who I am right now." And I think that's a beautiful, beautiful gift, because as we accept ourselves for who we are and mean that this is me grieving, that in the most darkest moment in our life, at the very least, there's a small glitter of light that's based on unconditional love, and that allowing ourselves to have that grief is that expression of unconditional love.
Yes, it is, and we
thank
need
you
to
for
have that toward ourselves. We are as important in that process as anybody else is, but we're much better at doing it for others than we are for doing it for ourselves. And that's the most important thing, is to learn to, that we are all love. We are all connected in love, and it's ridiculous to leave ourselves out of that surrounding of love. And I think if we can visualize our hearts and see what we're putting our hearts through, that we can learn to at least love a piece of ourselves and allow ourselves to be in that place. Wherever we are is the right place to be, unless we're, it involves somebody else, and then that's a whole nother discussion. But for grieving, we have to allow what's happening, because it's ours.
It is ours. It is.
I'm sorry.
I'm saying I'm agreeing with you. It is ours. It's totally our own personal journey. It's I think everyone, like you said, everyone handles grief in their own unique way, because it's our own personal journey. Sometimes from that grief, like you said, an incredible gift of self-love starts from that, and it's beautiful in that aspect. Mm-hmm. For me, one of the things about grieving is that it allows me to become aware that it hurts because I loved, and I no longer have this person with me. But that's the key. It's that love, and as we begin to heal, is that love that we have for that person that allows us to heal in the first place.
Yes, and that's why I think culturally, when we say, we have to keep that stiff upper lip, and we have to go out there and, pretend it hasn't happened, and we have to compete in the marketplace, and we have to smile, and it's so damaging to people. And if they could just accept that we need to be who we are at the moment that we are, and whatever happens from that, it's nobody's business but ours. And that's why writing a book about grief was so important to me, to make sure that it was not dogmatic and it was not saying this is how it should be. It's very important that it be what you need it to be, because it is your journey. Like you said, it's your journey, not mine.
Yeah.
But it does help to know that people have been on it.
Yes. We've got 5 more minutes of the show. We're about to start closing. What's in your calendar? What's next for you, Therese?
Well, it's right now. The book is about to be released. Will be
Congratulations.
Released April 1st. Thank you. Well, I know you're on that same path, and of course you know what it takes to I think we don't write a book unless we actually want people to read it. I mean, anybody that says they don't care what happens to it, they're not telling the truth.
Of course.
We definitely have a little bit of hubris in us that says we have something to share and we want people to receive that. So there's a lot of work involved in getting out there and doing that, and keeping up somewhat with my clients and my family, and I have a couple of books percolating and looking forward to doing some work on that when I have some free time. And I do have my heart math clients, and I'm always in school of some kind or another. So I'm going to be in Jacksonville, Florida on the 6th, teaching a half-day workshop for women. And if anybody's interested in that, they need to go to breakinggroundeducation.com, and they can register for that. And that's been a real interesting turn in my life. My daughters have a company where they teach sustainable contracting. And they have an education division, and I'm teaching the sustainable you. So I think it starts on the inside, and then they work on the outside part. So there's a lot of synergy going on.
And Therese, can you share your website again?
It's ThereseTappouni.com.
Beautiful. And if anybody that's listening to this show orders your book, then they get the MP3
for free
meditations.
Yeah.
Make sure if you're interested in the book that you email. And the meditations look amazing. When you sent me the list of them, I was in awe of how many you had created and what a variety there were of them.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. Well, when you get to a certain age, you can accomplish a lot. When you look back. Yes, I have. I've been very fortunate to be able to put my work out in the world, and I know you both know what that feels like. So I'll keep doing it as long as I can.
It's really an honor to get to interview you and meet you in this forum and share your teachings. And I wish you so much blessings on all of your work. You're going to touch many people, and I know that you already have. And it's just such a joy to be part of the Hierophant family with you.
Oh, thank you.
Welcome to the
It's a joy
family.
for me. Thank you. I'm really enjoying the family. It's been a great blessing. Yeah.
That's so
Thank
cool.
you both. I appreciate it so much.
Well,
Yeah, and
thank you, Therese. Thank you so much, HeatherAsh. We've run out of time. I want to say thank you to everyone who tuned in to listen to us. You can catch the replay of today's show on the cocreatornetwork.com. You can also hear it on iTunes, on both Toasty Radio and the Way of the Desert iTunes podcast. And you can also hear the archives on the website. For more information on Therese Tappouni, on the gifts of grief, visit her at theresetappouni.com, or just simply look at our websites and Facebook, and you can see the link. Thank you so much for everything. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy. See you next time. Namaste.
Blessings, everyone. Bye-bye.
Heartbreak, won't you fade away? You've been a weary friend for so long. You kept a tab on the world outside and all the crazy turns I took wrong.